Marcus Hayes was a dreamer. Born in the heart of Harlem, New York, his childhood was an intricate blend of vibrancy and hardship. The colorful murals that adorned his neighborhood walls spoke of resilience and history, while the cracked sidewalks beneath his feet whispered tales of struggle and perseverance. It was here, amidst the cacophony of jazz melodies and the hum of bustling streets, that Marcus first discovered his love for art. From a young age, Marcus saw the world differently. While others marveled at skyscrapers and bustling traffic, Marcus was drawn to the subtle beauty in the mundane, a discarded soda can catching the light just right, the intricate patterns in a brick wall, or the sorrow etched on a stranger's face. Armed with a simple sketchpad gifted by his mother on his 10th birthday, Marcus began to translate the world around him into strokes of pencil and splashes of color. Despite his natural talent, Marcus's path was anything but easy. His father, a hard-working mechanic, often struggled to make ends meet, and his mother juggled multiple jobs to support the family. Art, in their eyes, was a luxury they couldn't afford to nurture. "Dream big, Marcus, but dream smart," his father would often say, encouraging him to focus on a practical career. But Marcus couldn't ignore the pull of his passion. The canvas became his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the weight of expectations and express the depth of his emotions. As he grew older, Marcus's art evolved. He began exploring themes of identity, culture, and systemic injustice. His pieces were raw and evocative, often depicting scenes of resilience within the Black community, children playing under the watchful eyes of ancestors, protesters standing firm against a tide of oppression, or the quiet strength of a grandmother braiding her granddaughter's hair. Each stroke of his brush carried the weight of his experiences, his heritage, and his vision for a better world. But the art world was not kind to Marcus. Despite pouring his heart and soul into his creations, he faced constant rejection from galleries and art institutions. The predominantly white-dominated industry often dismissed his work as too niche or too political. His portfolio, filled with masterpieces that spoke volumes, was met with polite smiles and hollow promises. "It's good," one gallery owner had once said, flipping through his sketches with disinterest. "But it's not what our clientele is looking for." These rejections were not just professional setbacks, they were deeply personal blows. Each dismissal felt like a denial of his identity, his voice, and his worth. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if his work would be more appreciated if it came from someone who didn't look like him, someone whose narrative fit more comfortably within the mainstream art world's narrow lens. Yet, for every door that slammed shut, Marcus found a window to climb through. He started sharing his work on social media, using platforms like Instagram and Twitter to reach audiences directly. Slowly but surely, his following grew. People from all walks of life resonated with his art, leaving comments that reminded him why he started this journey in the first place. "This piece brought me to tears," one follower wrote under a painting of a Black father holding his child against a backdrop of protest signs. "Thank you for sharing our story." Despite the glimmers of support, Marcus still longed for validation from the traditional art world. He dreamed of seeing his paintings hanging in prestigious galleries, of hearing critics analyze his work with the same reverence they reserved for the masters. But each attempt to break through the barriers of the industry left him disillusioned. At one point, a prominent gallery outright told him, "We love your work, but our audience wouldn't connect with it. Perhaps if you tried a different style?" Instead of dimming his light, these experiences only fueled Marcus's determination. He began to understand that his art was not meant to fit within the confines of what the industry deemed acceptable. It was meant to challenge, to provoke, and to inspire. He refused to dilute his voice for the sake of palatability. "If they don't want to hear me," he told himself, "I'll make them listen." Marcus's studio became his battlefield. He worked tirelessly, often losing track of time as he poured his soul onto canvases. His small apartment, cluttered with paints, brushes, and unfinished pieces, became a testament to his unwavering dedication. Late at night, he would sit on the floor, surrounded by his creations, and remind himself of his purpose. He wasn't just painting for recognition, he was painting for his community, for the generations that came before him, and for those who would come after. One evening, as Marcus walked home from a local art supply store, he passed by a high-end gallery hosting a lavish exhibition. Through the large glass windows, he saw wealthy patrons sipping champagne and admiring abstract pieces that, to him, felt devoid of soul. His heart sank as he realized how far removed this world seemed from his own. But instead of giving in to despair, Marcus clenched his fists and made a silent vow. One day, he thought, they'll see my work in there. And they'll finally understand. The journey ahead was daunting, but Marcus knew he couldn't give up. Every rejection, every slight, and every hurdle only served to strengthen his resolve. He was an artist, a storyteller, and a dreamer. And no matter how many times the world tried to silence him, Marcus Hayes was determined to make his voice heard. As he stood before a blank canvas that night, paintbrush in hand, he smiled to himself. This wasn't just the beginning of a new painting, it was the beginning of a revolution, one stroke at a time. The sky was a steel gray that afternoon, heavy with clouds that seemed to mirror Marcus Hayes's trepidation. Clutching his worn leather portfolio tightly under his arm, Marcus approached the imposing facade of Cranston Art Gallery. The building exuded opulence, with its sleek glass exterior and polished marble steps that gleamed in the faint sunlight. This was one of the most prestigious art galleries in the city, known for hosting the works of renowned artists and catering to an elite clientele. Just stepping through its doors felt like an achievement, but Marcus wasn't there to admire the artwork on its walls. He was there to find his place among them. For weeks, Marcus had meticulously prepared for this moment. He had carefully selected pieces from his collection that showcased his range and depth, paintings that spoke of joy, pain, history, and resilience. Each piece was a fragment of his soul, a testament to his journey as a Black artist navigating a world that often sought to sideline voices like his. He had rehearsed his pitch in front of a mirror countless times, ensuring that his words would convey the passion behind his work. But as he reached for the heavy glass door, a wave of doubt washed over him. What if this was just another dead end? Brushing off his unease, Marcus stepped inside. The gallery was as grand as he'd imagined, with pristine white walls that seemed to stretch endlessly, interrupted only by the carefully placed paintings and sculptures. Soft lighting illuminated each piece, casting an almost ethereal glow. The faint hum of classical music played in the background, adding to the air of exclusivity. Behind the sleek reception desk stood Richard Cranston, the gallery owner himself. He was a tall, slender man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and his thin-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose gave him an air of authority. Richard was known for his discerning eye and sharp tongue, a gatekeeper of the art world whose opinion could make or break an artist's career. Marcus approached the desk with a polite smile. "Good afternoon. My name is Marcus Hayes. I'm an artist, and I was hoping to speak with you about potentially showcasing some of my work here." Richard glanced up from his laptop, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to thinly veiled disdain as he took in Marcus's appearance. Marcus was dressed simply but neatly in a button-down shirt and jeans, his dreadlocks tied back neatly. To Richard, however, he didn't fit the image of an artist worthy of his gallery. "We don't take walk-ins," Richard said curtly, barely looking at Marcus. Marcus hesitated, unsure how to proceed. "I understand that, but I've been following your gallery for a while, and I believe my work aligns with your vision. I brought my portfolio to show you." Richard sighed, clearly annoyed, but gestured for Marcus to hand over the portfolio. Marcus placed it on the desk and opened it, revealing a collection of his most powerful pieces. There was echoes of the past, a haunting depiction of a lynching tree transformed into a symbol of resilience. Harlem Serenade, a vibrant celebration of Black joy, filled with dancing figures under a golden moon. And Unbreakable, a portrait of a young girl with a defiant gaze, her hair crowned with sunflowers. Richard flipped through the pages with mechanical disinterest, his fingers barely grazing the edges of each piece. He muttered, pausing briefly at one painting before moving on. When he reached the end, he closed the portfolio with a loud snap and pushed it back toward Marcus. "These are interesting," Richard said, his tone dripping with condescension. but they're not the kind of work we're looking for." Marcus's heart sank, but he mustered his courage. "Could you elaborate? I'd appreciate any feedback you have." Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "If I'm being honest, your work is too political. It's heavy-handed, almost confrontational. Our clientele prefers pieces that are more universal, more sophisticated." Marcus felt the sting of those words. "Sophisticated?" he echoed. "Are you saying my work isn't sophisticated because it reflects my experiences as a black man?" Richard waved a hand dismissively. "Don't take it personally. I'm just saying it doesn't have the broad appeal we're looking for. Most of our buyers are affluent collectors who want something tasteful to hang in their homes or offices. Your pieces might resonate with certain audiences, but they're not commercially viable for a gallery of this caliber." Marcus clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "So, what you're saying is that my work doesn't fit because it speaks to a perspective you don't deem valuable?" Richard shrugged, unbothered by Marcus's growing frustration. "Call it what you want. I'm just being honest with you. If you want to make it in this industry, you might consider adapting your style, something more abstract or minimalist. People like art that makes them feel cultured, not uncomfortable." The words hung in the air like a slap to the face. Marcus could feel his chest tighten, a mix of anger and humiliation bubbling inside him. He wanted to argue, to defend his work, to make Richard see the beauty and power in his art. But he knew it wouldn't matter. Richard Cranston had already made up his mind. "Thank you for your time," Marcus said finally, his voice steady, despite the storm raging within him. As he turned to leave, Richard added one final jab. "Good luck, Mr. Hayes. You'll need it." The words echoed in Marcus's mind as he stepped out onto the street, the cold air biting at his face. He felt a lump in his throat, but he refused to let the tears fall. He had faced rejection before, but this was different. This wasn't just about his art, it was about his identity, his worth, his place in a world that seemed determined to push him aside. Marcus walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, his mind replaying the encounter over and over. He thought of all the sacrifices he had made, all the late nights and early mornings spent honing his craft. He thought of the countless times he had been told he wasn't good enough, and how each time, he had picked himself up and kept going. This time would be no different. By the time Marcus returned to his small apartment, the humiliation had given way to resolve. He sat down at his desk, opened his sketchpad, and began to draw. Each stroke of his pencil was filled with purpose, each line a defiance of the words Richard Cranston had thrown at him. He didn't need the validation of an arrogant gallery owner to know his worth. His art was not for people like Richard, it was for those who saw themselves in his work, who felt the weight of his stories and found strength in them. As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus finished the first draft of his new piece. It was a portrait of a black man standing tall in a storm, his face illuminated by a bolt of lightning. The man's gaze was fierce, unyielding, and unapologetically proud. "This," Marcus whispered to himself, "is just the beginning." The days after Marcus's encounter with Richard Cranston were filled with a mix of anger and determination. He threw himself into his work, channeling every ounce of frustration into his art. His small apartment, already crowded with canvases and art supplies, became a creative sanctuary where time seemed to stand still. Each painting he completed felt like a rebellion against the voices that had tried to silence him, a testament to his unyielding spirit. Marcus continued to share his work on social media, though with little expectation of immediate change. His Instagram feed, once a modest collection of sketches and paintings, began to evolve into a curated portfolio. Each post was accompanied by heartfelt captions that explained the stories behind his art. He wrote about the struggles and triumphs of his community, the weight of history, and the enduring power of resilience. Slowly but surely, his posts began to attract attention. One evening, as Marcus scrolled through the comments on his latest painting, he noticed a message that stood out. It was from someone named Catherine Ellis, a renowned art collector and philanthropist with a reputation for discovering underrepresented talent. Her message was brief but electrifying. Your work is extraordinary. Let's talk. At first, Marcus thought it might be a prank. People like Catherine Ellis didn't just stumble across struggling artists on social media. But when he clicked on her profile and saw her verified account, filled with images of prestigious exhibitions and collaborations with celebrated artists, his skepticism gave way to cautious excitement. He responded immediately, thanking her for her kind words and agreeing to discuss further. The next day, Marcus found himself on a video call with Catherine. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. Her enthusiasm for his work was palpable. "Marcus," she began, "your art is breathtaking. It's raw, powerful, and deeply moving. I've been collecting art for decades, and it's rare to find someone who can tell such profound stories with a brush." Marcus felt a lump in his throat as he listened. For years, he had been told that his work was too political or too niche. To hear someone of Catherine's stature praise his art so sincerely was almost overwhelming. "I'd like to include your pieces in an upcoming international exhibition I'm curating," Catherine continued. "It's called Voices of the Unheard, and it's dedicated to showcasing artists from marginalized communities. I believe your work would be a perfect fit." Marcus could hardly believe his ears. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. The exhibition would be held in Paris, one of the art capitals of the world, and would feature artists from around the globe. It was the kind of exposure Marcus had only dreamed of. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Catherine arranged for several of Marcus's pieces to be shipped to Paris, and her team handled everything from framing to installation. Marcus was flown out to attend the exhibition's opening night, an experience that felt surreal from the moment he stepped off the plane. The gallery hosting Voices of the Unheard was a sprawling, modern space in the heart of Paris. Its walls were adorned with powerful works from artists representing diverse cultures and experiences. Marcus's paintings were given a prominent position near the entrance, where they immediately captured the attention of visitors. On opening night, the gallery was packed with art enthusiasts, critics, and collectors. Marcus stood nervously by his section, watching as people stopped to admire his work. He overheard snippets of conversations, words like mesmerizing, transformative, and unlike anything I've ever seen. For the first time, Marcus felt truly seen. One of the highlights of the evening came when a prominent art critic approached him. She introduced herself as Sophia Moreau, a writer for a leading art publication. "Your work is phenomenal," she said, her eyes scanning the paintings. "There's such a depth of emotion and storytelling here. I'd love to interview you for an upcoming feature." The days following the exhibition were a blur of interviews, photo shoots, and offers from collectors eager to purchase his work. One collector, a billionaire philanthropist, bought 3 of Marcus's paintings for an astonishing $2.5 million. Another piece, Unbreakable, was acquired by a prestigious museum for its permanent collection. As word of Marcus's success spread, his social media following exploded. People from all corners of the world reached out to express their admiration and gratitude. His inbox was flooded with messages from aspiring artists, community leaders, and even students who had been inspired by his journey. Marcus took the time to respond to as many as he could, humbled by the outpouring of support. The media quickly picked up on his story, dubbing him the voice of a new generation in the art world. Headlines celebrated his rise from obscurity to global recognition, often contrasting his humble beginnings with his newfound fame. Marcus was invited to appear on talk shows, podcasts, and panels, where he spoke passionately about his journey and the importance of amplifying marginalized voices in the art world. Despite the whirlwind of success, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that his journey wasn't just about him, it was about the people and stories that had shaped him. He used his platform to advocate for greater inclusivity in the art industry, calling for galleries and institutions to support artists from underrepresented backgrounds. One particularly moving moment came when Marcus returned to Harlem for a community event. Standing in front of a mural he had painted years ago, he spoke to a crowd of young artists about perseverance and the power of storytelling. "Your voice matters," he told them. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There will be people who try to silence you, who tell you that your story isn't worth telling. But if you keep pushing, if you stay true to yourself, you can change the world, one brushstroke at a time. As Marcus looked out at the faces in the crowd, he saw something he hadn't seen in Richard Cranston's gallery: hope. It was a reminder that his success wasn't just about the recognition or the money. It was about creating a space where others could dream, thrive, and tell their stories without fear. Back in his studio, surrounded by canvases and sketches, Marcus began work on a new series. This time, he wasn't painting for validation or acceptance. He was painting for himself, for his community, and for the countless voices that had yet to be heard. And as he dipped his brush into a vibrant pool of color, he smiled, knowing that his journey was only just beginning. Success hadn't changed Marcus Hayes. If anything, it had clarified his purpose. After his meteoric rise in the art world, his life became a whirlwind of opportunities, exhibitions, partnerships, and invitations to exclusive events. Yet, Marcus's heart remained rooted in his beginnings, in the cracked sidewalks of Harlem, and in the dreams of countless artists who, like him, had been overlooked and dismissed. With his newfound wealth, Marcus decided to expand his influence beyond painting. He began investing in the art world, not just as a creator, but as a visionary. He didn't want to simply exist within the system that had once shut him out, he wanted to reshape it. A bold vision, investing in change. One evening, as Marcus sat in his spacious studio overlooking the New York skyline, he reflected on his journey. His thoughts drifted to the many artists he had met over the years, talented individuals whose work never saw the light of day because they didn't fit the narrow mold of what the industry deemed acceptable. He thought of the rejection letters he had received, the dismissive glances, and, most vividly, the encounter with Richard Cranston. Richard Cranston. The name brought a bitter taste to Marcus's mouth. Despite the countless accolades and successes he had achieved since that day, the memory of being belittled in Richard's gallery still lingered. But rather than fueling anger, it spurred an idea, a bold, audacious idea. What if I could take that space, Marcus thought, and turn it into something meaningful? The more he considered it, the clearer his vision became. He wouldn't just buy a gallery, he would create a network of spaces dedicated to showcasing underrepresented artists. These galleries would celebrate diversity, champion marginalized voices, and serve as beacons of inclusivity in an industry that often prioritized profit over passion. And Richard Cranston's gallery, once a symbol of exclusion, would be the perfect place to start. Cranston Art Gallery on the Brink. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Richard Cranston's gallery was struggling. The once thriving space had seen a steady decline in foot traffic and sales over the years. Richard's rigid curation and refusal to adapt to changing tastes had alienated potential buyers and artists alike. Where other galleries embraced the digital age and diversified their offerings, Richard clung to his outdated ideals, believing that exclusivity was the key to success. By the time Marcus began researching the gallery, its financial troubles were an open secret in the art world. Rumors swirled about unpaid debts, dwindling clientele, and Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to keep the business afloat. For Marcus, it was an opportunity too perfect to ignore. The acquisition plan. Marcus assembled a team of advisors, including lawyers, art consultants, and financial experts, to help him navigate the acquisition process. He was determined to approach the situation with professionalism and integrity, even if part of him relished the poetic justice of the moment. "I don't want this to be about revenge," Marcus told his team during one of their strategy meetings. "This is about creating something positive out of a negative experience. If we do this, we do it right." Over the next few weeks, Marcus's team conducted thorough due diligence, uncovering the full extent of Cranston Art Gallery's financial woes. The gallery was heavily in debt, and Richard was scrambling to find investors. When Marcus's offer came through, it was a lifeline that Richard couldn't afford to refuse. The meeting. The day of the meeting between Marcus and Richard arrived with an air of anticipation. Marcus, dressed in a sharp but understated suit, entered the gallery with a quiet confidence. The space looked much the same as it had during his first visit, pristine white walls, soft lighting, and an air of exclusivity, but it now felt hollow, as if the soul had been drained from it. Richard greeted Marcus with a strained smile. He looked older than Marcus remembered, his once impeccable appearance now marred by visible stress. He extended a hand, which Marcus shook firmly. "Mr. Hayes," Richard began, his tone polite but wary. "I must admit, I was surprised to receive your offer." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "The art world is a small place, Mr. Cranston. I've been following your gallery's journey, and I believe there's potential here, potential that's been untapped." Richard nodded, clearly uncomfortable, but desperate enough to entertain the idea. The two men sat down in the gallery's minimalist office to discuss the terms. As Marcus outlined his vision for the space, a gallery that prioritized inclusivity and innovation, Richard's expression shifted from skepticism to a mix of disbelief and resignation. "You're planning to change everything," Richard said finally, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Yes," Marcus replied simply. "This gallery needs to evolve, or it won't survive. The world is changing, Mr. Cranston, and the art world needs to change with it." Richard didn't argue. He knew Marcus was right. After hours of negotiations, the deal was finalized. Marcus Hayes was now the owner of Cranston Art Gallery. A new beginning. The first thing Marcus did after acquiring the gallery was rename it. It would no longer bear the name of the man who had once dismissed him. Instead, it would be called the Mosaic Gallery, symbolizing the beauty of diversity and the power of many voices coming together to create something greater. Marcus spared no effort in transforming the space. He brought in a team of designers to reimagine the gallery's interior, making it more inviting and reflective of its new mission. Vibrant murals replaced the sterile white walls, and interactive installations were added to engage visitors. The gallery's first exhibition under Marcus's ownership was titled Unheard Narratives and featured works by artists from marginalized communities around the world. To ensure the gallery's success, Marcus implemented programs to support emerging artists. He established scholarships, mentorship opportunities, and artist residencies, all aimed at giving talented individuals the resources and exposure they needed to thrive. He also partnered with community organizations to host workshops, lectures, and events that encouraged dialogue and collaboration. The encounter with Richard. Despite the changes, Marcus didn't fire Richard outright. Instead, he offered him a position as an assistant curator, a dramatic demotion but one that came with an opportunity for redemption. Richard was initially resistant, but with few other options, he reluctantly accepted. Working under Marcus was a humbling experience for Richard. He was forced to confront his biases and rethink his approach to art and curation. Over time, he began to see the value in Marcus's vision and even admitted, albeit grudgingly, that the gallery's transformation had breathed new life into the space. The ripple effect. The Mosaic Gallery quickly gained a reputation as a groundbreaking institution. Critics and collectors praised its innovative approach, and artists from around the globe sought to be featured in its exhibitions. The gallery became a symbol of progress and inclusivity, inspiring other institutions to follow suit. For Marcus, the success of the Mosaic Gallery was more than a personal victory, it was proof that change was possible. He had taken the very space that had once symbolized exclusion and turned it into a beacon of hope. And in doing so, he had not only reshaped the art world but also reaffirmed his belief in the power of resilience and vision. As Marcus stood in the gallery one evening, surrounded by visitors admiring the latest exhibition, he felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. This was his legacy, not just as an artist but as a change-maker. And it was only the beginning. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city as Marcus Hayes stood outside his newly acquired gallery. The sign above the entrance had been replaced, the bold letters of the Mosaic Gallery gleaming under the soft lights. It was a moment he had imagined many times since the day he first stepped through these doors and met Richard Cranston. Back then, he had been an unknown artist, dismissed and belittled. Now, he was the owner of the very space that had once symbolized rejection, transforming it into a sanctuary of inclusion. Inside, the gallery buzzed with activity. Marcus's team was busy preparing for the grand reopening, ensuring every detail reflected the gallery's new mission. The once cold, sterile walls were now alive with vibrant colors and powerful art. Each piece told a story of struggle, resilience, and the beauty of diversity. Marcus had reached out to artists from all over the world, many of whom had been overlooked by traditional institutions, and given them a platform to shine. The transformation of the gallery was not just physical, it was symbolic. For Marcus, this wasn't about revenge. It was about creating something meaningful from a painful experience, about using his success to pave the way for others who, like him, had been denied opportunities simply because they didn't fit the industry's narrow mold. A conversation with Richard Cranston. Richard Cranston had watched the changes unfold with a mix of disbelief and resentment. He had spent decades building his gallery, only to see it slip away due to his refusal to adapt. Now, it was in the hands of the very artist he had dismissed so carelessly. Marcus had offered him a position as an assistant curator, a gesture Richard initially viewed as a humiliation. But as the days went by, he began to see it as something else, a chance for redemption. On the eve of the reopening, Marcus found Richard standing in the corner of the gallery, staring at a large painting that dominated one wall. It was one of Marcus's own works, a piece titled The Storm Within, depicting a lone figure standing tall amidst a raging tempest. The figure's expression was one of defiance and strength, a reflection of Marcus's own journey. "It's powerful," Richard said quietly, his voice devoid of the arrogance Marcus remembered. "I never really understood your work before." Marcus approached him, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored jacket. "Art isn't just about beauty," he said. "It's about truth. And sometimes, the truth makes people uncomfortable." Richard nodded, his gaze still fixed on the painting. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "About your work, your vision, all of it. I let my own biases blind me to what was right in front of me." The admission surprised Marcus, though he kept his expression neutral. "It takes courage to admit that," he said. "But the real question is, what are you going to do about it?" Richard turned to face him, the weight of his past decisions evident in his eyes. "I want to help," he said earnestly. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but if you'll let me, I want to be part of this." Marcus studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity. "You have a lot to learn, Richard," he said finally. "But if you're willing to put in the work, there's a place for you here. Not as the man you were, but as the man you can become." The grand reopening. The night of the grand reopening arrived, and the gallery was filled to capacity. Artists, collectors, critics, and community members mingled, their conversations blending with the soft strains of live music. The energy in the room was electric, a testament to the transformative power of Marcus's vision. Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting guests and watching as they admired the art on display. Each piece had been carefully chosen not just for its aesthetic value, but for the story it told. There were paintings that celebrated cultural heritage, sculptures that challenged societal norms, and installations that invited viewers to reflect on their own biases. In the center of the gallery, a large plaque had been installed, inscribed with a message that encapsulated the gallery's mission. "Art is a mosaic of voices, each one unique, each one essential. This space is dedicated to those who dare to speak their truth and to those willing to listen." As Marcus watched guests pause to read the plaque, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than just a gallery, it was a movement, a celebration of the voices that had been silenced for too long. Richard's transformation. In the weeks that followed, Richard embraced his new role with humility. He immersed himself in learning about the artists whose work was now featured in the gallery, many of whom came from backgrounds and cultures he had never taken the time to understand. He attended workshops and lectures hosted by the gallery, engaging in difficult conversations about privilege, bias, and the role of art in fostering empathy. For Marcus, watching Richard's transformation was both gratifying and bittersweet. He knew that not everyone would change, that there were still countless gatekeepers in the art world who clung to outdated ideals. but Richard's journey offered a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even those who had been part of the problem could become part of the solution. A legacy of equality. As the Mosaic Gallery flourished, its impact rippled beyond the art world. Other galleries and institutions began to take notice, reevaluating their own practices and making efforts to diversify their collections and support emerging artists from underrepresented communities. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences and panels, where he shared his story and advocated for systemic change. But for Marcus, the true measure of success wasn't in accolades or recognition, it was in the artists whose lives were transformed by the opportunities the gallery provided. He often spent time mentoring young creators, sharing the lessons he had learned and encouraging them to stay true to their vision. One day, a young artist approached him after a gallery event, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for creating this space, for believing in us. You've given us a chance to be seen." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's all I ever wanted," he replied. "For everyone to have the chance to tell their story." A poetic justice. Years later, as Marcus stood in the gallery, now a thriving hub of creativity and innovation, he reflected on how far he had come. The memories of rejection and doubt no longer weighed him down. Instead, they served as a reminder of the resilience that had brought him to this moment. Richard Cranston, now a respected member of the team, approached him with a folder of new artist submissions. "I think you'll want to see these," he said with a smile. Marcus took the folder and flipped through the pages, pausing to admire the work of a young artist whose style was bold and unapologetic. "This," he said, "is what it's all about." As the evening sun cast a warm glow over the gallery, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. He had turned pain into purpose, rejection into redemption, and a single moment of humiliation into a legacy of equality and hope. And in doing so, he had proven that art, like life, was a canvas where even the most unexpected strokes could create something beautiful.